My name is Brent Harder, and I'm a banker. And for those of you who have been to the UK, banker rhymes with something else that I won't say as well. So, and I don't represent a company that is as I think inspirational as you as well. But I'm here to actually share a story, and it's not necessarily a story of one company. It's not necessarily a story of Credit Suisse. It is a story of three companies. It will be General Electric, HSBC, and Credit Suisse. So as a disclaimer for the next 8 slides, and that's all the slides I have, so we will be right back on track for lunch. And I will tell you that my first 2 slides have the answers to the quiz and the test that I will provide at the end as well. But in all seriousness, my first 2 slides have everything that I want to say. So we'll start there. We'll start with the end in mind as we go through. But it is an honor to be here. The story I will tell is one of, as I say here, one size does not fit all. We'll hear a lot about Lean. We heard a lot about Kaizen, a particular tool. I think Dr. Leiker talked about getting your hands dirty. What a fantastic example of that. I'm going to bring us up a little bit higher, and I'm going to talk about the need to continually evolve the way it is that you do your work. And again, it's fantastic to be with each of you because we are all chief change officers. It's our responsibility to empower and to facilitate change in each of the companies we work with or the organizations. But let me add one element to that. I think it is chief sustainable change officers. And that's the lesson I've learned working with General Electric, HSBC, and Credit Suisse. I'll be honest, I probably have learned more how not to do it than how to do it. And let me see if my story rings true to some of you who are, let's say, further along the journey. Some of you have been at this game for 4, 5, 7, 10 years. Some of you are just starting, so don't be scared. Hang in there with me till the end. There's a happy ending to the story. There are 3 things I need to point out, and one of those is homework for you as we go through. The first is you'll note at the bottom of my slide a reference to Booz Allen and Hamilton, the white paper that's referenced on the bottom, Picking Process Design Methodologies. I use that on slide number 7. I want to make sure that if you want further information, that's where it comes from. The second thing I want you to all do, run, don't walk to the newsstand, because I think they're changing out The Economist magazine today. You need to get last issue, and I need you to pick up that Economist so you can read the article called From Bitter to Sweet. It's the Honeywell operating system story. And it's a fantastic story because it mimics exactly the story that we'll talk about in the next 32 minutes. It's been going on for 8 years. It started with Larry Bossidy. Those of you who know Larry Bossidy and Jack Welch were close colleagues years ago. And Larry Bossidy was very inspirational in bringing thematically the idea of Six Sigma to Jack Welch in the mid-90s. And it's a story of Jeff Cody, who went over from General Electric to Honeywell about 8 years ago and has implemented this Honeywell operating system. And if you look at Honeywell's numbers, those of you who think that it's important for those of us in for-profit businesses to make a profit, Honeywell sales in 2011 are 72% higher than they were in 2002. Their turnover, or their profit, has doubled to $4 billion in that same time. And theirs is a story of Lean, a story of Six Sigma, and a story of the Toyota production system. It's a combination of all 3 of those. So that's your homework. And the third article that I'll reference, many of you have this wedged between your fishing magazine or the last issue of Cosmopolitan or Vogue magazine. It's the Quality Progress April edition. A movie sequel often can be, if not more captivating than the original take. Like think about Godfather Part 2, or let me show my age. Those of you who waited for Empire Strikes Back after Star Wars. More recently, maybe Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Audiences everywhere, and I quote, couldn't wait to get inside theaters on opening night to see what happened to the Corleone family, or Luke Skywalker, or Frodo and Sam. Essentially, a sequence builds on the original, continuing a journey with familiar characters and settings, developing ideas and unveiling additional insights. This happens to talk about the new 7 quality tools from Ishikawa's original 7 quality tools. It's building on that theme of the idea of continually evolving. So here's the answer to the quiz. Vive la différence. Number 1, focus on leadership and execution. Leadership and execution. This is my advice to all of you after 20 years. I still have a limp, just a bit from some of these things. Your job is to deliver and enable change, and there is a difference. What Victoria described in terms of executing, doing, that's the delivering change. That's the roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty, and deliver. Don't think, if you're sitting reporting to the board of directors or you're the chief quality officer, that it is not important for you to get out there and do and be part of each of these Kaizen events and be seen as doing. You must, you need to be there. But if that's all you're doing, you're in a one-to-one return model. You are only capable of delivering what you're able to do with your sleeves rolled up. That's part of your job, but your real job is a one-to-many. That's enabling or fostering change. That's why it's important to focus on leadership and execution. Very difficult to be successful with a focus on one. The second is around organizations are not necessarily homogeneous. I work for a bank. The front office, you can think about the traders, and these are the guys that, the ladies and men up front who are making all that money trading and buying and doing all that sort of thing. They are a very different animal than those of us in the back office who are ensuring that each of those trades, those bits and bytes, gets through the system. The back office and front office of a financial service institution are very different. And if you think that you can implement your lean program or your quality program the same way in both, you're going to end up in difficulty. However, there's a bungee cord that connects the two as well. So yes, they're different, but if the front office gets too far in front without the back, or the back gets too far away from the front, at one point they come together. It's not a skydive, Victoria, it's actually a bungee jump. And it comes back, and sometimes the velocity can surprise you at how hard it hits. Number 3, lesson learned. Number 3, reason to relish the difference. Business dynamic should guide the selection of your methodology, not necessarily the consultant you're working with. So if you have a lean consultant in-house and it's all about lean, sometimes that becomes a hammer looking for a nail. And I've found that it's not always the right tool for the right job. Your challenge is to be thinking about, is this a process streamline instance? Is it an enhancement? Or as Dr. Leiker talked about, is it a transformation? Do we need to use lean to transform the very DNA, to borrow a GE term, to transform the very DNA of our company? Sometimes some tools are better suited for an enhancement, for a transformation, or for a redesign. And lastly, and this sort of stems to the previous, don't necessarily follow the latest fad. One size does not fit all. As I've read in the article, and as I've referred to with the Honeywell operating system, sometimes it's a combination, or the morphing, or the changing, or the bending of what you have in front of you that's the most appropriate for the business dynamic, as well as the maturity of your deployment. And that's where I talked about. Some of you are just beginning, others of you are like me and have the limp and have been at this for 6 or 7 years, and you have the bumps and the bruises to show for it. Let me show what I mean. So first of all, this is where we'll start, and this is where we'll end. These are the 4 lessons, if you will, that I have for each of us as chief sustainable change officers. Think of the maturity of an organization just like we think about the S-curve of a product introduction life cycle. On the vertical axis, you'll see the net business benefit. North of the line would be a positive, and south of the line would be a negative. So there's a cost to the business anytime you're south of the line, and some sort of return anytime you're north of the line. What I have observed over 20 years in doing quality deployments, be they Lean, be they Six Sigma, or even TQM, is initially there's a start at the bottom of the curve. And you can see it's very difficult to see. There's a light blue line that's showing a curve. Normally at the start, there's a cost to the business, right? You're engaging your stakeholders. You're marketing your program. You're establishing some quick wins. You're doing improvements for the business. You're out there with your sleeves rolled up, and you're doing improvements for the business. In essence, if you think about the idea of fishing or teaching a man to fish versus fishing for a man, you are doing the fishing at this point. The second is you begin to go up. So initial cost to the business, as you begin to go up the growth curve and you cross over the line of cost into return, you'll see that there's actually continual building of infrastructure, and as the infrastructure builds, you can begin to adjust your approach as needed, and you can begin to align to local requirements. One thing that's important to remember in both of these elements is I talked about the difference and the need to morph and combine methodologies to be successful. One thing that's very important that I have found, you'll notice on the last bullet on the first section, a common or one methodology. In this case, I put down DMAIC, the Six Sigma: define, measure, analyze, improve, control. You'll see in a future slide that the keep it simple, stupid principle applies very, very much early on in the beginning. You can confuse your audience and can confuse your organization if you try to do too much too soon. Keep your program simple. Follow a seemingly single methodology, and you'll have a bit faster trajectory or move up into the growth phase. Okay, so far so good, right? We've implemented our program. There was an initial cost to the business while we were paying consultants. We were training black belts and yellow belts and silver belts and white belts and all those belts. And then finally, we get to the top or the peak of the curve, and in many cases, they start to talk about the decline once it starts to go down. I like to think of it as maturity. You've reached a particular level of maturity. So in this case, it's very, very important to be thinking about transitioning to line management, moving your quality program away from a central quality office into the line. So let me tell you a quick story, because my intro said that I'm with Credit Suisse. I am with Credit Suisse for another, I guess now, it would be 57 days. So my last day with Credit Suisse is June 1st. Why is that? Because we have programmed the movement of the quality program from a central organization into very much of a satellite or a, we call it a planetary system. I'll describe that in a moment. Because what we've seen is when I first came into Credit Suisse, and hold on to your hats, there were 157 black belts reporting into me in the quality business. 157. Again, that's on an organization of 47,000 people globally. But my job was to begin to take those black belts and move them into the business, parcel, get them into the business, embed them so that they were part of the business. And we've been doing that over the last 4 years, driving them into the business. Trying to describe what we do, the best terminology I've come up with is a planetary system, a solar system. My job has been to develop a gravity that holds these various planets together. And at one point, June 1st, we actually sever the actual lines and we go into a virtual sense. So it's been an ongoing journey, and here's where we are. But it's important to think about, because I've been here before. I was here at HSBC when we were doing this. This is when the program at HSBC died. So HSBC We go through both of these phases. We go into this phase, and we called it business as usual, and we claimed success. We say this is now the way we do work, because we were able to post millions of pounds of return for our investment, and we claimed success at this point. So what we've done is we've gone from doing business or improvements for the business to doing improvements with the business to letting the business do improvements. At this point with HSBC, we let it go, and guess what happened 6 months later? It was we lost everything. There was not even mention of a quality culture or a Kaizen culture or a continuous improvement culture. It just went away. We didn't do what was important. On the next phase, you can see, if you could see the further slide, you need to think as quality, as chief sustainable change officers, how to continue onto the next iteration. And that's where we are now. It's called business as usual, where what we're thinking about doing now is moving this into a steady state where we hold on loosely. So it's less about trying to hold your business organization together around a single methodology, but letting them go off. So here's what happened. At Credit Suisse, we started off using a DMAIC structure, DMAIC. We started doing improvements for the business. After we did improvements for the business, we started to train more and more black belts. They started to do their own improvements. Then we go into this planetary model where they start to do improvements. We were letting the business do their own improvements. Guess what they did to my quality program? They changed the name. They started using new terms. It wasn't operational excellence is what we called it. They started to use new terms. They used, and it doesn't translate well, BOM, business optimization methodology. I told them that it probably wouldn't work well to say BOM, but they did that. The other one they used is RIP, rest in peace. Well, it's called rapid improvement process. These are some of the things. And the last one that was funny was DADI, D-A-D-I. And it was like define, analyze, determine, improve. I forget what it was. But what happened is each of the lines of business, be they the investment bank or the asset management or the private bank, began to look at quality and the tools that they had learned over 5 years and began to take them in themselves and make them their own. So what was a single methodology at the beginning grew and branched into very, very different planets with a similar theme. And that's that gravity that was holding it together. Let's talk a little bit step back and talk about the evolution of all of this. But before I go, I promise that the two things, remember there were 2 slides, this is the end of the second slide. Think about these 4 elements from an evolution perspective and you should be okay. Doing improvements for the business, with the business, let the business do improvements, and then just let go. Think about it as being a parent of a teenager at one point. You've just got to let go. You can't hold on forever. Hopefully they're trained and they're ready to go. So let's talk about the evolution. Let's just go through this very quickly. We had a fantastic story this morning on the history of the lean story. For me, it started back in the 80s with total quality management. If you think about the 70s and 80s, remember back, I know some of you, I see some nodding heads out there, some of you are back there with me on executive steering groups and this idea of Crosby and the quality is free, and Joseph Duran, the trilogy of quality, and then of course Dr. Demings that Dr. Leiker mentioned in terms of the plan, do, check, act, or the Shewhart cycle, the continuous improvement cycle as well. Foundationally, and elementally, things we still do today. But what we did from there was we began to move on. This idea of lean manufacturing comes into play. And we heard about the reference to Womack and Jones in Lean Thinking, a book that I know many of you have on your desk, published in 1996. It started us to think more and more about the actual mechanisms around that. And the idea of process standardization and documentation of quality comes into play as well. Many of you are involved with ISO 9000 and the documentation of quality management systems. I was as well during the 80s and the 90s. And then from there, we begin to think about the Michael Hammer revolution, right? The business process redesign and completely throwing things out and starting from scratch and, job loss and all that sort of thing. And we think about business process redesign. And at this point also, in the 80s, the mid-80s, General Electric comes onto the scene in 1995 with their Six Sigma program, and Jack Welch cannot get out of the news everywhere. It's all about Six Sigma this and Six Sigma that, and an entire revolution of consultants start to come into play. And from there, we begin to see this idea of Six Sigma. What's next, if there was another block on top of that, is this idea that I think you hear now, Lean Six Sigma. You hear about operational excellence, which is a combination, as we heard about with the Honeywell operating system. It's a combination of these elements that you're starting to see quite a bit now. When you see the job postings, it's not about you're a Lean expert, you're a Lean Six Sigma expert. You're a facilitator, a business process management expert as well. They've all come into play as well. My question to each of you is, are any one of these responsible for an enhancement in organizational performance, or are they all? It's a rhetorical question, but just think. In my opinion, I think it's elements of all that have led to an organizational enhancement for each of us. So which one do we choose? You're your Chief Sustainable Change Officer. Which one do you choose? I think it really comes down to starting out, number one, taking the key elements that we saw from all of those building blocks. And I think the very, very first and most important element is this idea of an outside-in perspective. Taking an outside-in view. The customer, be it external or internal, absolutely must be your primary orientation. Rule one, step one. Number two, I mentioned it already, it has to be simple. Simple to understand, simple to scale, and simple to manage in terms of the way it goes from an execution. Number three, to make it real, it has to be rigorous. It can't just be superficial, it can't just be PowerPoint slides. There has to be some fact-based business cases that we're able to document with clear assumptions and then clear checkpoints that the business and senior management can see a progress. And lastly, results focused. There absolutely needs to be, especially in a for-profit company like a bank or a service industry, there needs to be this idea of making it happen, making that progress move, and whether it's a positive return on equity or return on investment, whether it's a customer satisfaction, whether it's an improvement in output quality, there needs to be a tangible return to each of that. So I think that there are three flavors then, if you will, in terms of what those are. We mentioned the first one today. Dr. Leiker talked about the ability of Lean to be a transformational force in a business. So the first idea of process redesign is transformation. What I mean by transformation, the operational definition of transformation, is quite simple. There are 4 or 5 bullets here. This is the radical redesign of a delivery model. It's breakthrough thinking. If I look at it from a baseline perspective, you will improve whatever measure you have set out by a magnitude of 25 or 30%. It's radically redoing the way you need to do work. But not everything is transformational. Not everything needs to be transformational. It can also be this idea of streamline. Here's where Six Sigma starts to come into play, where you have a process that's operating and you need to do a surgical enhancement to improve the vital few areas where defects are occurring. Remember the 80-20 rule, where 20% of overall variation is causing 80% of overall cost, or the idea that you need to drive to that vital few. So what you're going to do here is you're going to look at improving existing processes. Instead of just going out and trying to redesign the way the whole company works, let's look at the existing processes. From a baseline perspective, we may look at returns anywhere from 5, 10, or 15%, but we won't have those radical, in most cases, 25 or 30% breakthroughs. Functional scope starts to come into play here. That becomes a determining factor. Transformation is normally going to be cross-functional, cross-business. You're going to cross all lines. You may even affect or impact your customer balance in a transformation. In a streamline effort, it's going to be less of an issue, but definitely more important to look and drive for a functional understanding. Also, the idea of leveraging green belts, or the part-time employee who you train just in time to be able to work on his or her part of the process is very different than a team of armed black belts running around the business in a transformational sense. So again, before I go in a bit further, you understand transformation, big, takes a lot of effort. You're probably going to really follow that S-curve. There's going to be initial cost to the business. Streamline, less so. Going to be more focused. Six Sigma comes to mind in a case like that. The next would be this idea of enhancement. Well, enhancement is going to be even more limited in the focus. This is the quick wins. These are the Kaizen events that can happen. You can do hundreds, or as Victoria, she's done thousands of these things. Thousands of Kaizens. But it can happen. And in any one company, you can be doing all three of these things. You could be doing only one element of these things, or you could be doing a combination of all of these things. You know, that's the message I'm bringing, is it's not, you take a transformational methodology and you try to do enhancements with it. It's like a jackhammer when all you really need is a little spade to turn the earth over, or a big sledge, when you just need a tack hammer. Or vice versa. It's trying to do transformation through Kaizen events, trying to change an entire operating model using Kaizen events, using little incremental. You may get there, but it's like digging a swimming pool by hand. I'd rather bring in a big tractor and do it all in one fell swoop to transform my back garden instead of by individual turning over the earth, right? Okay? So let's take those three elements and just capstone each of those. If you think about transformation, the degree of change is high. Lots of change. Enhancement, degree of change, not so much. Choo-choo, little. So this one here, think about the sample methodologies. I've already mentioned transformation, think lean. Enhancement, on the higher level, you're going to think more about this concept of GE workout, or as my colleagues call it, RIP, rest in peace, rapid improvement process. And in the middle, Six Sigma might be helpful. What are some examples that I've seen? Sorry, this slide is it builds, but this is slide number 7. There's only one more that follows, so hang in with me. Some examples that I've seen, there are 3 key decision points that you need to go through as a Chief Sustainable Change Officer. 3 things to think about when choosing the methodology or the enhancements that you're going to use. Number 1, business criticality. You need to think about the critical nature of the business. What are we talking about? Is it production or non-production? In my line of work, in banking, the idea of procurement is not critical, right? We don't need to ensure that we've got all the right materials just in time on the loading dock, ready to go into production for the day. For us, procurement is more services. We might have an HR vendor that's providing benefits from a pension perspective, or a mutual fund manager that we're outsourcing to Fidelity in Boston that we need to bring on. That's procurement in our sense of the word. That can wait till Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. But the idea of production, or making sure that a trade is happening and happens in a timely fashion, is critical in my line of work. So the very first question that we ask right there is the business criticality. The second question you should ask is the functional scope. What's the nature of the change that you need to make? Is it one department? Is it the procurement department? Is it the front office and the middle office? Is it the front office, middle office, compliance, risk, CFO, etc.? I mean, is it across the entire business? The scope starts to weigh in, and then the third question. The third question is the time frame. So the 3 ideas in terms of your decision points as Chief Sustainable Change Officers you need to think about before you choose which program you want to use, which tool. Is it the tack hammer or the sledgehammer? Think about these 3 things. So let's just take 1 or 2 as an example. The first one that might be from a transformation perspective would be the very top line. Think about it. Business criticality is high, functional scope is excessive, time frame long. In this case, this was a business model. We're going to change our business model. Think about Swiss banking. Do we need to change Swiss banking? Every time I try to go back to the United States, this customs officer asks me, so what do you do? And I have to say banker. That's always number 1. That doesn't get you friends. Number 2, I'm a Swiss banker, and now I'm really in a lot of trouble. So Swiss banking model is absolutely under attack. And if you don't think so, you just pick up the Economist magazine or the Financial Times and it's absolutely under attack. UBS, Credit Suisse, is changing right now their business model. ROE, return on equity at Credit Suisse, was 17% 1 year ago. Last quarter, 1%. It is absolutely dried up in terms of the old banking model. Do we need to change? Yeah. Is it going to be hard? Yeah, it's transformational. Some of the other ones might not be so much. Think about going from production into production to market. That might be involving one particular area, and in this case we may want to streamline. In a manufacturing sense, there could be a bit more transformational. Or it could just be vendor management. We want to think about the way we're managing a particular vendor in a manufacturing sense. Enhancement. Get a workout. Get your teams that interface with the vendor. Get them in the room. As Victoria said, make sure they're empowered. Close the door. Get the thing done. Make the decisions. Get the policies changed. You're out. Enhancement's done. Finished. It's not transformational. You did choo-choo. You did finish. You just did enough, and you're out the door. Keep going down. You can see now we're on the bottom line. We're less critical. Yeah, it's still transformational because we're going to redefine our procurement process, but it's still less business critical in the way you do it. The way you deploy your resources as a head of quality will also depend on each of these examples as well. Get the point? So without going through an actual example on each of these, because I could have project examples on each one of these, let's just think about each of those in those lines. Okay? So what does success look like then? The last slide. So if you do all of this, and you're able to follow the advice I gave you on the first slide, the first 4 things, those are the lessons I learned. Remember my limp? When you don't follow those things, you get injured. This is what it looks like. Number 1, we'll start from the top and build our way down on this. So again, if you're doing this well, you should have a faster scale up for effort and growth of the community, but not the growth of your team. The community of, I keep going back to Victoria's pitch. You can almost feel the energy at the company in terms of the growth of communities. That's what success looks like, not the growth of your team in terms of more resources. If this is what's happening, if you're answering the phone and they're saying we need more and more of your people to do improvements for the business, you're not in a sustainable change yet. You're making change, you're doing improvements for the business, but you're not at the next level that you need to be for sustainable change. Number 2, absolutely, if you're seeing a meaningful buy-in from management and employees because this customized methodology is more appropriate to solving business at hand, that is a success. You're seeing people modify their names, they're coming up with their own names. I took that as a success. These people are making it their own. They're customizing quality to be their own. And after a while, it becomes part of the DNA of a company if you're doing it right. Number 3, I think it's very, very important to continually to put points on the board. So as you're playing football, you need to make sure that the board, you're constantly making points. And those points have to be communicated in such a way, Victoria talked about it, in a very public way. They've got to be celebrated. I think I like not so much the cake and coffee, I like the other idea. But there does need to be this idea of celebration. It needs to be a combination of quick hits and long-term initiatives. So that's the ability to continually do those Kaizen events, but it's also a great opportunity to have a big transformation event going on at the same time. My recommendation for each of you as quality heads, leaders of quality, you get involved in that big transformation effort. Be part of that, because you will then have an interface point to so many elements of the company that you'll begin to see how this is moving through and pushing its way through the company. A warning sign. So we call our program, Credit Suisse, we called it Operational Excellence. I knew I was doing it wrong about 8 to 10 months ago when my boss said, I want you to be seen as Mr. OE. So like the Kanban, or what you said, the sisters. Yeah. And I looked at him and I said, Rudy, I'm sorry, but that's absolute. If people see me as the face or the back of operational excellence at Credit Suisse, we've done something wrong. It's not one person, it's not one team, it has to be the business. Okay, last two. Number one, lingua franca, common language. I think there needs to be a common language. One of the big things I took and still have from my 10 years at General Electric, there was a common language. You use the word CTQ, critical to quality. You absolutely, the sales leader, the head of sales knew exactly what you meant. The back office, the head of the production line knew exactly what you meant. There was a idea, a common language that spread across the company that was absolutely instrumental in driving some of the DNA changes, and I think that that's important, and that's where that keep it simple is very important as well. Last sign, last bullet of the last page before we go to lunch. If people are coming and taking your assets, your resources, putting them into the company to do not just quality work, but to head a new production line, you're doing something right. I was very, very pleased. The last 7 master black belts that I placed in the business did not go into quality. What happened is each of these master black belts had been involved in a large transformational element in the business. And the way the business told me is they said, Brent, Susan was instrumental in London in driving this transformation of the way in which we processed. This was a compliance around SOX efforts. The way we were doing this, who better to run that department than someone who has had the hood open and knows all of the plumbing, all of the piping, and all of the electricity and how it flows. We want her to be the head of that business. Off she goes. Fantastic growth for her. Fantastic opportunity. And guess what she does? She's now in the business. What does she do, and how does she leverage quality to run her business? Absolutely what she learned in the 2.5 years she was on our team. That's that growth, and that's that sustainability. It's the you tell 2 friends, they tell 2, and so on and so on. So that's my story. It's for those of you just beginning, it's a fantastic journey. It's a fantastic job. You will get up and some days feel like knocking your head against the wall just to see some blood because you see something instead of nothing. You feel like it's 2 steps back for every 3 forward at times. But when you get these 5 things, when you begin to see these 5 things happening, ongoing, time and time again, then it really is a neat experience. And I encourage all of you, feel free. I would love to hear your stories as well, and maybe we can chat over coffee when we get outside. But thank you for your attention. Thank you really for your passion and your enthusiasm for doing what we do. I think it is absolutely an essential element of the corporate and the organizational cultures that we do. So thank you very much, and we'll see you at lunch.